All right, welcome back everyone. We have a ToDo's application that for most part is completely implemented. Now what we had done in the previous videos was to implement this once following a structured programming, imperative programming, and then we switched over to use a style that is more aligned with functional programming and declarative programming. Now in this video, I want to start working on object-oriented programming, and we're gonna go and incrementally chip away at the application and convert things into a style that is more aligned with object-oriented. And my assumption is that most of you have background in object-oriented programming. It's very common that in your first or second programming courses, you learn to work with a language like Java or C++, or even if you're coming from a language like Python, it is likely that they did teach you about object-oriented programming. So we're going to spend a little bit less time going over the concepts. Most of this must be familiar to you, and then make sure that you refer to the quick JavaScript coursebook as well for some of the other touches, especially in areas where JavaScript is different from other languages like Java. So to sort of get us started with the idea that we want to develop is that in a object-oriented programming language, we model our application as a collection of objects, and these objects, they represent different concepts or entity in our problem domain, and these objects interacting with one another to fulfill the responsibilities of the application. Each object is going to have its own state and behavior, and in object-oriented programming languages that are class-based, you use the notion of a class as a blueprint where you define the structure of objects, and then you create instances of those class that represent the individual objects. So let's bring all of these to a concrete example. Like in our application, for example, a ToDo could be an object, right? It's going to have like its own state. Right now you can see we have ToDos, and when we create one, we give it an ID, it has a text, and it has completed. And then there are some behaviors that are relevant to a ToDo. For example, you may want to toggle the completed state of a ToDo, right? So let's go and create a new file. I'm going to call this ToDo.js. So we start with just creating the ToDo class. So class ToDo. So far it should feel familiar with languages like Java or C++. You use the class keyword to create a class. By convention, I'm using the name, the variable name or the class name with a capital first letter. And I should also note that this is a relatively new addition to JavaScript. So JavaScript originally did not have the class keyword. So you may find some references that when we talk about JavaScript and how you might go about implementing object-oriented programming in it, they would call JavaScript as a prototype-based object-oriented programming language as opposed to a class-based object-oriented programming language. And so it's probably safe to say that's not the case anymore. We have the class syntax, although it's mostly syntax a style of OOP, which JavaScript traditionally implemented. At any rate, let's go and work a little bit more with it. And so again, in languages like Java, you know that when you want to instantiate a class, you would do something like this. Like let's say if this was Java, you would do ToDo, then variable name, and then new ToDo, something like this. And so this part of it doesn't make sense in JavaScript because JavaScript is a dynamic programming language. You don't assign data type to variables like this. So instead, we're going to need to use the regular way, like using const or let. So I'm going to go with const, right? And then in a language like Java, this would be like the constructor, right? So you would come here and define something like public ToDo, and that would serve as the constructor, this special operation which has the same name as the class name. And again, JavaScript doesn't do it that way. In JavaScript, you would have this special method which literally is called constructor. Okay, and then again, in a language like Java, you would go and declare variables like private ID, private, I don't know, text, private completed. Of course, these things, they need to have their data types if you're doing it in Java. And then here you would go and like initialize them, right? So you probably, maybe ToDo should manage its own ID, but for now, I'm just gonna like let it just receive all of these for now. Now let's call this completed, right? And so again, it's not news to you. These don't have data types because that's how just JavaScript works. And then like you would go and do something like this. And this is very similar to like what you probably do in Java. So you initialize the fields by calling the constructor. So it would be something like the first ToDo by milk and false. It's not completed. So we don't have well, that's not how you typically define attributes of a class in JavaScript. We definitely don't have the private keyword. So I'm gonna take this off, and in a future video I'm gonna show you how you can create private fields. The syntax is different, but I'm gonna take this off, and having actually like private fields is even a more recent addition. But this is how you basically define or you assign a state to your class, and it might seem a little weird because you have not, it's appeared as you haven't defined this and you're kind of using them, but that's how JavaScript works. In fact, you can use this keyword anywhere in any operation inside this class to assign attributes to your class. But I would discourage doing that. If the best thing is to just do it in the constructor. So when somebody looks at the constructor, they know that these are the attributes. This is the state of the object. So you can create methods. Like for example, if I want to toggle the completed, I can call this method toggle, right? And again, if this was Java, you would have to put like private, like define the return type, for example, void, but you don't have any of that. So, and I mean like public void if this is, I mean, supposedly we want to access this outside, right? So it doesn't make sense to make it private. But anyways, when you go here and you want to access any of the field, you must use the this keyword. So if this was Java and like you had this ID defined somewhere up in here, then you could just use like ID, or you could just use completed. But here you must use this to access the properties of that class. And so we just want to get this and flip it to whatever, like the opposite of whatever it was. So if we go and let's say do console log ToDo and then go and do ToDo toggle, and we're using the dot operation just like other object-oriented languages to invoke operation on an object. And if we print it out, supposedly here it's going to be not completed, and then the second time it's going to be completed. If you want to create like maybe in our domain, it makes sense that when we create a ToDo, it's always set to false. Like it doesn't make sense to create a ToDo and say it's already completed. So that in that case, you can take this off and just say false. If you want to be more flexible, and so we can like take this out. If you want to be more flexible and like allow the user, maybe they want to, as a way of documenting, they want to just add the tasks they already done it, and so they want to create it with a completed status. So you can do something like this, completed, but then give it a default value of false. So when it's not provided, it's false, but if you go and actually provide it, then it will use that variable to override the default value. Okay, so let's actually go and give this a try. I'm gonna run this directly from the terminal. So open the terminal and then do node src ToDo.js. And so here's our ToDo class with ID 1, the text by milk and completed is false. And then when we go and toggle the status of it, it becomes completed. Okay, that's nice. Now a couple of other things to make note of. All of these attributes that are defined here, they're publicly available. So by default, JavaScript does not encapsulate, well, it doesn't apply information hiding principle. This is an encapsulation, but it doesn't adhere to information hiding principle. And in that sense, it's more like Python. So you can directly access any of the fields. You can just do ID, text, and completed. And for that matter, let's go and do something that's probably not a good thing to do, which is like change its ID. and then print it again. So if we run this one more time, you can see I have access to all of these, and I just updated the ID to a different value. So in maybe when you build a small application, this might be fine. Generally, the wisdom is that when you build larger and larger application, you want to only expose the things that is absolutely necessary from your class and protect all the other attributes of your class. So there is less chance of someone somewhere accidentally updating something, and then that can create nasty bugs that is hard to trace down, find, and debug. All right, so we're gonna wrap up this recording, and in the next recording, I'm gonna show you how you can use the more recent feature of JavaScript to create private fields.